Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Here.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Rod and Connor, who are always working behind the scenes to produce our broadcast on Channel 20. So thank you, gentlemen, for all that you do. We do have one speaker tonight, so I'm going to go read through the instructions here. We're now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting. When we invite the public to make comments, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it's appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. We do have a clock on the wall to help with the 2 minutes. And it's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. So we thank you for your interest and your cooperation. And as I said, the clock on the wall will help you. We have Mr. Buell is our speaker tonight. So hit the button and turn the mic on, sir. There you go.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
My name is Bill Buell. I'm a product of the Rockford Public Schools. I was also employed by the District 205 for 34 years at both middle and high school. I'm here to address good old cell phones and the destruction and the addictions which have transpired in all districts. I put together a 13-page document of which I'm going to refer to just the ugly. And this is what the last 4 years I've experienced in a classroom. My W-2 from District 205 last year was $6,700. It equates to 52 days working in a classroom. So I have, and this is the ugly, I have subbed in many classrooms where the only agenda of the day for students was to spend 95% of their class time texting, watching Netflix movies, playing video games, taking selfies, while increasing their addictions to the device. When reviewing the teachers' lesson plans at all levels of instruction, regular honors AP had teachers telling me that students can listen to music as long as they work. I guess they can multitask. I personally witnessed students checking their phones minutes apart for the entire hour, sending and receiving text messages. I've observed students who require their phone on their desk or in their hand the entire hour of class time. I've unplugged phone chargers in classrooms only to have students question and reprimand me for that action. Due to the sub shortage, I've had to cover additional classrooms in all buildings where student behavior and cell phones were intolerable and rude. I've been in classrooms where the F word can be heard over 100 times in 50 minutes. During passing periods, listen to inappropriate language being yelled at by various students. This won't even surprise me. In an algebra class, watch numerous students use their phone using PhotoMath, an app which scans the problem in about 2 seconds, the entire review page being done.
I'm going to have you summarize your thoughts, okay? Because we're at 2 minutes.
Okay. My thoughts are very simple.
Okay.
I go to the Masters every year. I've been there the last 4 years. There's 80,000 people on the golf course. I have never seen a phone or a camera on the course. Okay, and lately the school districts that are taking phones away, putting them in yonders is such. You pay me $133.07 a day, and incidentally, the inside contract, it costs me $15 a day because of Social Security is taken out, which I don't receive. So it's almost a waste of my time and your money for me to go into a classroom in District 205 after a 34-year career. I'm also a member of the Golden Apple Academy, so I can handle a classroom. I can't handle these are not classrooms, and I'm fed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buell.
I'm sorry?
Do you want to share that document with the board?
What I'd like to do is email to all of you, because there is also good in here, like the days I volunteer at Marshall for 2 days at a time and teach the entire 4th grade about density. There is good in Rockford 205.
That would be
I'm just
fine.
talking about the bad as well.
Sure.
Would you like me to send you this document?
Sure, yeah, that would be great. Sure.
Okay, because it's very comprehensive. And I even went backwards to the old principal of South Beloit in 2013 and found a couple of
Okay.
quotes from Dr. Vosberg about that policy.
Yep, thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
All of our email addresses are on the website, sir. I would ask, are there any board member comments at this time? Mr. Dixon?
Yes, I would like to actually thank the board for the focus on diversifying our staff. We had on the 21st, District 205 sent workers out to a job fair, and the job fair is where was a target towards more diverse pool. And so to see them there and see other entities there, I just wanted to give kudos to them. Because we always talk bad about you, but we never give you when you do stuff good, and that was something good to be in the community.
Mr. Connor?
This topic is going to come back to us, and I mentioned it last time. It was my comment, or my topic was around security, especially cybersecurity. There was some more reporting on incidents here in the area. And one of the things I'll say is, full transparency, Mr. Bartell and I have talked about this. There have been more than 40-some hacking incidents in Winnebago County this past year. This is something that I think we need to start seriously thinking about cross-governmental bodies. And it's something that I've suggested that we look into. So you can expect as a board that this topic will come back up. And the district is doing a lot of good work. There have been a lot of things that have gone on to make it better. However, this is not going to stop. And I would say it's one of the areas of security. We worry about all the things that happen physically, but I'd say the cyber side is something that we're going to have to take a lot more seriously. So I'm giving you a heads up that this is going to continue.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel?
This is our last board meeting before the school year launches, and I just want to tell all the students, teachers, and all the other staff who have had much of the summer off, I hope you had a great summer, and welcome back. I'm very excited that the school year is about to be underway, and I hope it's a very successful one for all.
Thank you. Mr. Rollins?
This is primarily for the many people who are watching us on Channel 20 in live time. If you missed your last opportunity to do a charitable event at Stockyard Bar and Grill, you've got another opportunity coming up tomorrow night for Rockford Promise, which is the program, a not-for-profit that provides scholarships to RPS 205 students who may not be able to go to college otherwise. So again, that's at Stockyard Bar and Grill tomorrow night from 5 to 9. Hope we see a lot of people there. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. We'll now move on to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following items: the meeting minutes from August 13th, 2019, payroll, accounts payable, purchase order, contracts under $10,000, and travel, the bid recommendation for the hail damage roof replacement at Froberg School, the recurring contracts for Circles of Learning, infant early childhood mental health consultant, the Center IRC resources for teaching and learning contract, the amendment to consulting agreement with K-12 Insight, the addendum to the middle school English language arts resource adoption, the consolidated contracts for personnel services for special education, LaParadid consulting, professional development, other consent items including the new school construction change order logs, RPS managed work change order, the resolution authorizing fiscal year 20 depositories, investment managers, dealers, and brokers, the monthly cash and investment report for June and July for 2019, the Rosecrans Agreement for Educational and Behavioral Health Services, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Connor?
8F.
Say that one more time, 8.
8F.
Okay. Seeing any others, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
And I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 8F, the consolidated contracts for personnel services for special education.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
Yeah, I think this is one, this is a lot of money. I mean, 4.1 million, and I think this is there's a lot of effort and certainly a lot of planning and delivery around this. So the reason I pulled it is to have the public have an awareness that special education is costly. It's a line item that we have year after year, and I don't think there's a question as such on it, but I think there's an awareness to the public that I think 15% of our population, school population, has an IEP, if I remember the number correctly. And the IEP represents a specialized plan for the individuals for whom that this applies to. So I think it's close to 5,000 students, something like that. And my point is, this is a very large part of what the district does. And from my point of view, it gets very little credit for doing what I think is really hard work. And if you know anybody that does special ed, I think it takes a special kind of person to provide the services. So I'm taking this opportunity to really say that I think the district does a really good job trying to do this, but this is difficult, and this is a very large part. So for the people that are streaming, in addition to going to the Rockford Promise fundraiser, I'd like you to think about how much effort and how much money is put into that special ed.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8F, consolidated contracts.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the appointment of Craig Carter as the 10-month assistant principal at Froberg Elementary, the appointment of Brian Jones as the 12-month director of grant programming, and the HR organizational report and addendum. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any items that board... Mr. Siegel?
Well, it was a tie. It was a tie.
Okay. Is there a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any items the board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session items.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford? Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
The next item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you. I want to spend a little time talking tonight about our school scorecard. Dr. Vosberg is going to join me up here as well. And I really want to lay out what our strategy is and really start with why. Just to give you a timeline of what's coming up here. The embargo is going to end on the 1st of November, October 31st. And so we'll get to see how schools performed. But I want to really kind of walk everybody through why we have our own school scorecard to support what the state does. So if you look at why I think it's important that we do this work with all of our schools is the way you improve your district is that 100% of your schools all need to be improving at the same time as well. And so that's really the underlying why for why we're doing this work. If you look at how a distribution of our schools may look, this is hypothetical, so this isn't meant to be a map of Rockford, but in theory we have some schools that are red, we have some schools that are yellow, some schools that are green, and some schools that are blue in our district. And what we would mean by that is if you put things on a 4-point scale, there's going to be a distribution in terms of school performance. And our goal is to ensure all students in our district have access to a high-quality school. So as we overlay on our neighborhood system the idea of having choice available to students, we don't want anybody in our community to feel like they are in a place where they can't access a green or a blue school. So we want to go from red, yellow, green, and blue to all green and blue. And that really makes sense, but we also believe that this strategy is not just about improving the schools for that sake, it's also about improving our community. And when we look at our community, one of the underlying assumptions that's wrong about that map is the map underneath our schools here isn't really gray. I believe it looks more like this. So just like our schools are red, yellow, green, and blue, our neighborhoods are red, yellow, green, and blue as well and have different levels of need. We're doing our Erickson work to dive into some of that right now and to really get a sense of that. And our ultimate goal is as we improve schools, we believe that neighborhoods will get better. And as we improve neighborhoods, we believe schools will get better so we can make that similar transformation. So ultimately our goal is to improve the community and the schools at the same time. And what the work will really look like is the schools aren't gray and the community isn't gray. We're going to try to go from blue, red, yellow, green, and red, yellow, green, and blue to all green and blue, community and schools. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. You can see the difference between the two. And I want to cite my favorite business author, Jim Collins. He talks about the importance of the genius of the and the tyranny of the or. And so what we're going to be doing with our work in the community right now is we're going to be looking for opportunities to find examples of ands, not ors. Because I think what happens in our community is we look at school improvement and we look at neighborhood improvement, and we often get into a situation where we say, well, as soon as the neighborhoods get better, our schools will get better. And then we say, well, as soon as our schools get better, our neighborhoods will get better. And the answer to both of those questions is and. Yes, both have to happen. And so we're going to be looking for partnerships in our community and efforts in our schools to drive both to happen at the same time. But ultimately, this is about making sure all of our families have access to a high-quality school and live in a high-quality neighborhood. So how is our scorecard going to be different when it rolls out? So currently, the state has an annual state scorecard. We're going to have an annual district scorecard. That's not going to be that dramatic. Both are going to come out around the same time. The current, the RPS scorecard is going to be a little bit different in this sense. We're partnering with ECRA. IAR and state, or an SAT, measure growth and attainment on the state report card year to year. So we're going to look at last year's IAR and see how we did year over year, basically 1 year at a time. Our RPS scorecard is going to take MAP, IAR, PSAT, and SAT, and integrate all of that into it to create one common score. So now there will be 9 data points that our schools can look at to see, are we making progress year over year? What we struggle with a little bit in the district is, should we use the fall to spring metric? Should we use fall to fall? What should we do? Well, this is going to take data points over a 2-year period and really drive that. I think the current state scorecard really ends up being about attainment. We really look backwards in November and we say, how did we attain last year? Our RPS scorecard, which we're going to tell you a lot about today, is going to be about growth and attainment. And I think it's important to do both because it's not just about where you start, it's about are you improving year over year. The state scorecard has some metrics that tie to climate and culture, but our RPS scorecard has 25% metrics that are tied to improving culture, which we believe drives student achievement. And then finally, I think one of the biggest challenges for our schools as they're on their journey of school improvement is they get a lot of messages from the community and the district about what success looks like. We want to hone in on one clear definition of school success. If you are moving the school scorecard and making progress from red to yellow, yellow to green, and green to blue, that message is going to be consistent no matter who your supervisor is, the board, the community. We can all know very clearly what success looks like. So that's why. Let's talk a little bit more about what the purpose is. We want to tell our own story. we will typically once a year have a big community conversation about how our schools are performing, and the media gets really involved in that conversation. Well, I want us to be able to tell our own story of school improvement. This is the most game-changing piece of it here, the blue ribbon piece. Recognize high-achieving and high-growth schools. Dr. Vosberg talked a little bit about what this is going to look like. The scorecard has about 20 elements in it. We're going to have our all-principal meetings once a month, and starting in December, what we talk about at the all-principal meeting will then drive into the school-level faculty meeting. So let's say we're talking about freshman on-track rate, and we're talking about the net promoter score in a school. And that's what our metrics are at the all-principals meeting. What we will then do is we will recognize the highest performers at that meeting, and we will have a template that allow them to go back to their schools and recognize the staff and teams of teachers that are driving those same metrics in their schools. So we're going to build a cycle of celebration in at all 41 of our sites. We also are going to be able to identify schools in need of targeted and intensive support. We're going to have schools that are red and yellow in some areas and green and blue in other areas. So we want to drive building-based resources through evidence-based funding to the areas that need them the most. And as we train our schools to be better at site-based budgeting, they're going to put their dollars into what we need the most. So it's really about recognition of the winning schools, things that are going really well, but it's also about identifying schools that are struggling in certain areas and giving them the resources they need to succeed as quickly as possible. And then ultimately, when it comes to our charters starting right now, we've already started the position of having the same scorecard for our charters, our special programs, and our neighborhood schools. So we can guide decisions about school turnaround and those actions. And I've asked the board to read a book about American schools, and I really think that is what's underpinning here. What are we going to do if our charter schools don't show improvement in the next 3 years? Okay, what are we going to do in our community as we look to have that every single school in our district be a great choice for families? What turnaround decisions and actions are we going to do? And the board really has to spend time during the strategic planning process to make that decision. This is really about continuous improvement for our schools and how do we get better year after year after year. And ultimately, we have to guide decisions around actions and turnarounds, not only for our charter sector, not only for our special programs, but for all of our schools. And ultimately, the board and the community need to decide what those rules are for school turnarounds. That's all high-level procedural policy stuff and the why behind it. Dr. Vosberg is going to really get into what's in the scorecard and how this is going to guide continuous improvement, because I cannot say enough that this is really about every single school being on its own journey to get better every year. Continuous improvement is not about where you start. It's about, are you making progress year after year after year? And he's going to talk about the work he's doing with the principals and the schools and the REA and the teachers to move that. So he's going to talk about how this will look in practice. So Dr. Vosberg, turn over to you.
So the scorecard will establish a framework for us to goal set and align our goals from the classroom to the PLC level to the building level all the way to the district level. And so the importance of scorecards and what we call cascading scorecards, there's an alignment throughout the system. So we're all doing work and pointing our boats in the same direction. From the principal supervision lens, there'll be a lot of conversations about those metrics, and there already are, but this will be more closely aligned through the system. But we have all principals meetings once a month where we bring all the principals together, usually in this room right here, and we'll work on different metrics on the scorecard. We have our level principals meetings where we meet by grade level. We do that once a month. And then the principal supervisors, there's 3 of us, will meet with principals on a one-on-one basis. All of our conversations will be intertwined with the work on the metrics of those scorecards. Not on the slide is another opportunity to meet with our secondary principals. We do a Google Hangout. I think I've talked about that in the past. We meet virtually on Tuesdays, and we check in on our weekly metrics, usually the on-track metric, and discuss our progress on a weekly basis, and also talk about some of the strategies that each principal is employing at their schools and trying to figure out what's working and what's not working across the system. We will also have an opportunity when we bring all of our principals together to unify some messaging and share that back to our teachers. And we'll have a conversation at an all principals meeting about a particular metric. It could be the employee engagement survey, for example, and then have a common message that goes back to their faculty meetings that principals will lead. So there's alignment there in that conversation. measurement on the scorecard, as Dr. Jarrett mentioned briefly, that we have a 25% of that card will be climate and culture, 75% will be quality instruction. That's a distinction from the state. The climate and culture piece, again, those are more your leading indicators. I think we can make some quick wins there and drive what happens with instruction. It's based on a 4.0 scale, so a 4.0 is the highest score a school could attain, and a 0 would be the lowest, of course. And it's weighted 75% for quality instruction and 25% for climate and culture. So this might be hard to read, but these are the metrics you would see we have 3 scorecards, one for EC, one K-8, and one for high school. These are the metrics you would see for quality instruction for EC. And those numbers represent a weighting out of the 3 points. 1 point would be for student meeting expectations exiting the early childhood program. These are their climate and culture measurements and the weighting for those. Sorry, the bottom ones are really hard to read. Sorry about that. Our K-8 scorecard, you see a lot of metrics that we already talk about, but we are combining MAP and IAR with the work of ECRA to establish a growth target like we do with MAP already. But now we're going to be able to use IAR to do that as well. And they will set targets for us and be able to tell us if we're making sufficient progress in growth. So we have proficiency metrics as well, math, reading, and writing. These are our high school metrics. Again, these are all metrics that are commonly discussed and used, but now we're going to put them on a scorecard to really track progress and again see what's working and what can we scale up across the system and see where we have some low points and where we need to make corrections. The climate and culture scorecard will be the same K-12. Again, these are some of the leading indicators. Some of these are based on participation in the survey. Some are based on the engagement score, showing improvement from year to year on employee engagement. We think that's a real driver to the culture of a building. At the end of the day, we will have a rating system, kind of a summative score. I know I have a few golfers on the board here, and when you golf, you have a score at the end of the day, and you know exactly how you did, right? And should I go to the driving range tomorrow, or should I take up a new sport? Should I call my friends and brag? So you know exactly where you're at the end of the day. And so with this metric, with our scorecard, we'll know at the end of the year, did we have a good year or a bad year? And just like golf, that's just the start of the conversation. Then you start to look down a little deeper and figure out where were the breakdowns and where can where can we find some areas for improvement. Our next steps, as Dr. Jarrett talked about, by October 23rd, we'll be able to have an overview of the scorecard with our principals. We hope to get data from the state by October 1st and be able to compile our scorecards and see how our scores are distributed across the system. October 31st will be the public sharing of all data from the state. And then November 5th, presentation to the committee of the whole on progress and the status of our schools based on the scorecards. All right, we'll open it up for questions.
I have one right off the bat that IAR, in the past, have they measured writing skills, or is that fairly new?
That's a part. I don't think it's not reported as a separate score when we get the state reports. Is it IAR? Is it recorded separately? Okay. Yes.
Okay.
It's already been existing.
Okay. Ms. McCullough.
I wasn't the only one who couldn't come up with this. Who's the third supervisor besides you and Joyanne?
Heather Saltis supervises the special programs principals.
Thank
Mr. Rollins?
So on the K through 8 metrics, and you sort of alluded to this, the growth targets that will be used, they're being developed with ECRA, and if I remember correctly, they were going to use local norms. So will the growth targets be different for each school? Is it going to be a district growth target? How is that going to be done?
So what they'll do is they'll look at, they call it a propensity score by student, and then they'll aggregate that for the school. And anybody else that said in the presentations that can help me explain that better. So it could vary from school to school, but it's based on local norms. So they're going to look and see what each kid would do based on previous test history, aggregate that by the school, and that would give you your target.
Okay, and that's similar to the conditional growth index that we've talked about, but ECRA is just doing that more based on local norms?
So yeah, ECRA is local norms, whereas MAP is a national norm. And I think the difference too is ECRA is going to include MAP and IAR, whereas MAP is obviously just MAP. So we're looking at two different sets of data.
Okay. So just from a timing standpoint, you are going to do that this year based on last year's data, so we're actually going to see what the scorecard's going to look like for each school
Yes,
for last year.
for last year, correct.
On October 30th, on November 5th. You'll see it before that.
Is there any, and I know the discussion is there any indication the state's going to get any quicker this year in releasing IAR scores? No?
No indication.
The state testing stuff is faster, a little bit faster than it's been, but there's so much other data that they collect and aggregate, and we're using a lot of the same data. We don't want to have a big disparity between state ratings and our ratings. We just think ours are will be more precise and be more oriented to helping with continuous improvement.
I think the really hard questions are going to come down the road when we have a school, let's say, that's continuously staying below expectations and not improving at all. And, what will we as the administrative and board team decide to do with a school that doesn't ever improve? And what steps should be taken and what resources can we provide, that kind of stuff. Those are the hard questions for me to think about.
They are hard questions, and I don't have an answer tonight.
Okay. Any other questions for Matt or Aaron? Nope. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now move on to action items for tonight. Our first action item is, got to turn the page. Thanks. Vans for instructional purposes that Ms. French presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12A, the vans for instructional purposes?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Move Mr. Connor and seconded by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 12A.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next action item is the resource adoption for college and career readiness textbooks that Ms. French presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12B, resource adoption.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to new business. Ms. Detman is going to present academic approach essay assessment.
Good evening. A brief presentation tonight, I think, although now that I've said it out loud, I need to knock on some wood. So this presentation tonight is for a partnership with a company called Academic Approach. And I'll start with a brief overview of the problem. The problem is quite simple. The SAT has an optional essay assessment. We have always opted in to giving our students the essay assessment because we believe in writing, and we believe in writing as a strong part of the instructional day. The difficulty is that in all of the practice exams for the PSAT, the students get practice in the evidence-based reading and writing portion and practice in the math, but there is no PSAT optional essay for them to practice. And so you can see here that we administer the full PSAT twice in 9th grade, twice in 10th grade. They get the PSAT in 11th grade, and then they have the test for accountability, the full SAT with the essay in the spring of their 11th grade year. But up to that point, they've not had an opportunity to practice writing an SAT-aligned essay and having it scored on the rubric. Our baseline score right now is a 3. Our target on the school scorecard, which you just learned about, is a score of 6. 3 puts us in line with the state average as well, but we'd like to see improvement there. And so, part of the background here is that we want to provide our students an opportunity not only to practice the writing, but also to be scored against that rubric. And we want to ensure that we have valid and reliable data so that teachers are able to then drive their instruction and response. We do have alternative choices with this. We could continue with classroom practice only. The challenge there is that we don't have that inter-rater reliability of having a highly trained troop of scorers all using the tool with fidelity, using the rubric with fidelity. And we're not yet to the point in our curriculum where we're consistent in every classroom across the district. The second option would be something that we've done in the past, which is to create common prompts in-house and then score them in-house. As someone who's been a part of that work and led that work through multiple iterations of continuous improvement, the return on investment of teacher time is simply not there. There's value in table scoring, there's value in anchor packets and inter-rater reliability at the PLC level. Once you zoom up to the district level, we're asking teachers to really crank out about 1,000 essays a day as a group, and it's a lot. And so the return on the investment of their time is pretty small. The third option would be to discontinue the optional essay assessment completely and then remove the writing metric from the scorecard. I think you'll agree with me that that's the least desirable of the 3 options. And so I reached out to several networks of mine to find districts that are doing something similar, and I wasn't able to find much. However, through a recommendation from Dr. Vosberg, I reached out to Academic Approach, and they offer an essay scoring service, essentially. They provide for us the text that is aligned to the complexity on the SAT. They provide to us a rubric. All freshmen, I'm sorry, not the rubric, the prompt. All freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will respond to the same prompt. We will then send those back. They'll be handwritten. We'll send those back to Academic Approach. They will use the scoring method as approved by the SAT on the SAT rubric, and then they will generate for us the data to send back. On our end, we are going to develop a Decision Ed widget that will allow our dashboard to work for us. So to take this data, turn it into a visual representation that will support schools and allow teams of teachers to drill down into student data, looking for trends and driving their instruction. The total cost for that service is $40,560 for all the groups of students and the frequency I listed initially in the red and green chart. We'll have 2 metrics really to assess the situation. The first is student growth metrics. Specifically, we're zoomed in on the school scorecard on the analysis portion of the rubric. That's where we're really getting into the student skill of analyzing author's argumentation, which is what the SAT assessment is designed to do. And the second assessment that we'll be looking at is our timeline with the company and meeting our project milestones to our expectations. Really, our return on investment here is opportunity cost at this point in time. We're, investigating a method for pushing this writing metric in and providing some consistent data longitudinally for students. We will report back in the summer of 2020 with either a request for renewal or a report back on why we're discontinuing this partnership and choosing a different route. And that is all I have. I'll take any questions that you might have.
Questions for Mrs. Detman? Mr. Siegel.
What's the turnaround time from submission of the essay to return to the student?
Excellent question. 3 weeks.
I'm sorry, how long?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And is the essay then, I'm assuming there's some sort of a conference with the teacher and the student to discuss
Yeah,
this?
great question. So we now have curriculum implementation leaders in our high schools, and what we'll be doing is leveraging our Dean of Secondary Language Arts, Carrie Mueller. She'll be working with the CILs to develop a data analysis protocol for PLCs to use to then take that information back and work as a team. We'll also be working on pushing that training and inter-rater reliability through the CIL to the PLC as well, so they can get into the meaningful conversation there and not have to worry about scoring thousands of essays on top of that.
And they're looking at reviewing about 6,000 essays annually?
Yes, twice a year.
For 40K?
Correct.
All right.
My question is, what would be your ideal target down the road of the type of and amount of improvement you'd expect to see, so that you know that this tool was an effective answer to your problem?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable for us, not just by adding an assessment, but by providing the data and the practice and the awareness for teachers and families and students. I think it's reasonable for us to reach our goal of 6.
Okay.
When I look at-
within what time frame?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's quite a direct question, Mr. Scrivano.
Okay.
Yeah, crystal ball. I think to see meaningful improvement, when I'm thinking about the full picture of what we're trying to do with new curriculum, we'll roll out new curriculum to English 11 next year. I think it's reasonable to think that we should see some significant movement within 3 years.
Okay.
I think we should see incremental growth in 2, but I think we should see something really happening within 3. That gives us 3 years with our middle school integrated reading and writing block to really grow some legs. It gives time for the freshman and sophomore curriculum. And so I think 3 years seems reasonable.
Okay. Mr. Connor.
Does our vendor have sample reporting showing potential correlations? I was just thinking as you were talking about cohorts and schools and all kinds of things. So they have standard reporting that they do already so that...
It's pretty low tech. What we will have is a spreadsheet. What we will be devising on our end in partnership with Decision Ed is how to then translate that data.
Okay,
Correct.
yeah. And will this be, so the data will be actually input from our vendor into Decision Ed, so we'll get a physical file from them?
We will get a CSV. We'll upload yes, we'll upload that CSV and then manipulate it in the ways that we need to provide meaningful data for teachers.
And just generally speaking, because you said you'd come back in the summer, I assume that you'll have a plan on, somebody's going to have to do all that analysis for that report back.
Correct. Yep, and that will be me. I'll in partnership with our assessment department. When you see this again next year, it'll be part of a consolidated PDSA for all of our assessments, including the SAT suite and NWEA math.
I was just going to, so this is when it showed that writing growth and all that, this will be a part of that? So on the school scorecard, it had a writing growth?
Yes.
This will be a part of that, okay. Then the last question is, do you anticipate that we will, let's just assume the best and this goes well, will you reevaluate the vendor and look for others? What do you think that process will look like?
I think we're going to see how year 1 goes. We'll have an indication of how the process is working, what the data looks like, and how teachers are reacting to it after the fall administration. We'll take the winter to pivot if we need to on our strategy, including adjusting the widget in any way needed. We'll get feedback directly from the CILs, and then we'll see how our spring administration goes. If we meet all of our project milestones and we have favorable feedback from teachers, then we'll know that the system that we've set up is working. Year 2, we'll start looking for some real growth between fall and spring.
Okay.
Did the vendor provide you with any other references for other school districts that had used their product?
Yes, but not this particular component.
Okay.
We are forging some new ground.
Okay. Beta testing.
Beta testing, pioneers.
Any other questions for Ms. Stetman? Okay, if not, this will be presented at the September 10th board meeting for approval by the board. Are there any other comments or agenda recommendations for the board? Seeing none, I will take a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Dixon. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 7:47.